I had been handling other people's financial secrets for 11 years before my own family decided to make mine front-page news, literally. It was a Tuesday morning in late October when my downstairs neighbor Gerald Fitch appeared at my apartment door holding the local paper the way you'd carry a dead bird at arm's length. 2 fingers, expression already apologizing for what was inside. Gerald was a retired postal worker who'd known me since I moved into the building. He didn't say anything at first. He just held it out and I took it, and we stood there for a moment in the kind of silence that only happens when someone is trying to decide whether to stay or leave you alone with bad news. He left. I sat down on my couch and read every word of the half-page advertisement my mother had purchased in the Crestfield Courier. Her name was at the bottom, printed in neat serif type, paid notice submitted by Renata Voss. The text above it was a public declaration that she had failed as a mother, that her younger daughter, me, Celeste, named in full, had grown into a woman with nothing to show for herself but a modest apartment, a middling salary, and a life small enough to disappear into. She listed the highlights of my alleged inadequacy with the precision of someone who had been drafting this document in her head for years. My divorce at 27. My salary range, which she had apparently estimated from tax forms she had no business accessing. My absence from family functions. My stubborn refusal to participate in the business that had, in her words, given our family its name. The strange thing was how calm I felt. Not numb. Calm. The kind of calm that arrives when something you always suspected finally shows up in writing and you no longer have to wonder if you were imagining it. My name is Celeste Voss. I'm 34 years old, and I work as a financial compliance analyst for a mid-size consulting firm in Crestfield, Ohio. I audit operational records, trace irregular expenditures, and document the kinds of discrepancies that organizations would prefer remained invisible. I am, professionally speaking, someone who notices things and builds cases from what she finds. My family had spent the better part of 2 decades treating that skill like a character flaw. My mother ran Renata's Table, an event catering company that handled corporate luncheons, anniversary galas, fundraiser dinners, and the kind of charity events where the centerpieces cost more than most people's grocery budget. The business was successful by local standards and deeply tied to my mother's identity. She had built it with the understanding that one daughter would inherit the hospitality side, and one would manage the financial operations. My older sister, Petra, walked into that arrangement like she'd been waiting for it. She had a talent for warmth that could work a room, and she used it from the time she was 17, standing beside our mother at tastings and venue walkthroughs and vendor meetings with the easy confidence of someone who knows exactly where she belongs. I told my mother when I was 16 that I didn't want that life. I wanted a degree, a career of my own construction, and the particular freedom that comes from not owing your livelihood to the same person who raised you. She heard that as rejection. She never stopped hearing it that way. The ad had been up 2 days before Gerald brought it to me, long enough for people to have seen it, clipped it, photographed it, sent it to each other. My phone had 3 unread messages from cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. There was a voicemail from a former coworker asking if I was okay. There was a text from my mother that said only, "I hope you're ready to have a real conversation now." I didn't respond to any of them. What I did was call into work, tell them I needed the morning, and spend 3 hours documenting everything. I photographed the ad from multiple angles. I saved the digital version from the paper's website. I wrote out a timeline of events in a plain document. I did it the way I handle any financial discrepancy, methodically, without editorial commentary. Then I started thinking about what my mother and Petra hadn't considered when they planned this. Renata's Table depended on a licensed commercial prep facility on Dunmore Street to handle the food volume required for events over 200 guests. My mother didn't own the building. She leased space in it at a rate that had been grandfathered in years ago when the neighborhood was considerably less valuable. I had known for the better part of a year, through work-adjacent conversations rather than any direct involvement, that the Dunmore corridor was being eyed for a mixed-use redevelopment project. The building's owner had been in preliminary discussions with a developer. Tenants with short-term or month-to-month arrangements were, professionally speaking, on a clock they may not have been watching. My mother had not been watching it. Petra's catering spin-off, She had broken off 2 years earlier to run her own smaller operation, Petra & Co., with a focus on intimate events and branded corporate gifting, pulled the majority of its reliable income from 4 long-term clients who placed quarterly orders large enough to keep the open ration looking healthier than its margins actually were. Those clients had chosen Petra & Co., in part because of the professional image the Voss family name carried in Crestfield. That image was now attached to a paid newspaper advertisement publicly humiliating a family member. I didn't manufacture any of this. I didn't invent problems or fabricate pressure. I simply stopped doing the thing I had been doing unconsciously for years, which was shielding the people who hurt me from the natural consequences of their choices. I had never directly warned anyone away from my family's businesses. What I had done, without ever framing it that way, was serve as a kind of ambient endorsement. People in my professional circle knew I was Renata Voss's daughter. When they asked about her catering company or my sister's operation, I had always been neutral, sometimes even quietly generous. I had absorbed a certain amount of association damage when family matters leaked into professional spaces, and I had done it without complaint out of some residual loyalty. That ended. Within 10 days of the advertisement running, I had 3 conversations that I would describe as honest rather than strategic. In each of them, someone who knew me professionally asked, because the ad had circulated further than my mother intended, as public humiliations tend to do, whether I was all right. I told them what had happened. I told them plainly, without decoration or appeal for sympathy, exactly what had been printed, who had printed it, and what my family's public image had always obscured about their private conduct. I told the truth, which required no embellishment, because the truth was already ugly enough. People make their own decisions from ugly facts. I didn't need to guide anyone. One of Petra's quarterly clients put their next order on hold, pending a review of vendor relationships. Another began sourcing comparable services from a competitor they had previously ignored. A third sent a brief note indicating they were simplifying their vendor list going forward. Petra called me twice within the same week, both times from numbers I didn't have saved, which told me she'd assumed I wouldn't pick up if I recognized her. She was right. I didn't. My mother came to my apartment on a Wednesday evening carrying a ceramic dish of something braised, the way she always arrived when she wanted the food to do the apologizing before she had to. She sat across from me at my kitchen table with the expression of someone who has rehearsed their remorse and is now performing it under pressure. She said she had only wanted to shake me out of what she called my retreat from the family. She said public accountability was something she believed in. She said she had hoped the ad might finally open a door between us. I asked her which door specifically she had hoped to open by printing my divorce in a regional newspaper. She didn't answer that. She said things had gotten bigger than she planned. She said Petra had added layers she hadn't anticipated. She said my father, who had, I learned, forwarded the digital version of the ad to roughly 60 contacts via email with a brief explanatory note, had acted on his own initiative, and she couldn't control everything. It was a fascinating repackaging of a coordinated campaign as a series of individual accidents. I had audited enough institutional malfeasance to recognize the structure, diffuse accountability, distribute the embarrassment, ensure no single person holds enough blame to fully implicate the whole. The Dunmore building sale finalized the following month. The new development group sent formal notices to all remaining tenants. My mother's lease was not renewed. Under ordinary circumstances, a business owner with solid community standing, strong vendor relationships, and a reputation for reliability. She would have found temporary space, managed client expectations, scaled operations, and rebuilt. But the Crestfield charitable community had spent several weeks having a very different conversation about Renata Voss, and venue coordinators have long memories. 2 event clients withdrew. One asked directly whether this was the same family from the newspaper. Another cited in writing concerns about professionalism. By the time the prep facility closed to her, the business it was supposed to support had already begun contracting. My mother came back once more in February. This time without food. She sat across from me again and said she was sorry, and this time it sounded less rehearsed, which should have made it more effective but somehow made it harder to absorb. She said she had lived inside a story about me for so many years that she had confused the story with the truth. She said she had watched her own older sister leave the family when they were young, and had never fully let go of what that felt like, and that somewhere along the way she had made me carry the weight of a grief that had never been mine. I believed her. I believed every word. And then I told her, as clearly and as carefully as I could, that I wasn't going to rebuild something with her right now. Not because I wanted her to suffer. Not because understanding her pain had changed nothing. But because I had spent 17 years extending good faith to people who treated my stability as evidence of my insignificance, and I was done performing reconciliation before I had actually healed. She nodded. She left. I don't know what she did with that. What I know is that I still live in the same apartment. I still work the same job, which I am good at and which pays me enough to be comfortable and save for the future and ask nothing from anyone I haven't chosen to ask. I know that the quiet life my mother printed a newspaper ad to mock is by every measure that has ever mattered to me. I know that cruelty rationalized as love is still cruelty. That public shame inflicted by a parent isn't a teaching tool. It's a confession about who the parent is. And I know that the moment I stopped absorbing the cost of other people's choices, those choices finally belonged to them completely. Some people believe that family loyalty means protecting each other from consequences. I used to believe that too. I've come to think it actually means telling the truth, even when the truth is that you've been complicit in your own diminishment for far too long. The thing that stayed with me wasn't the ad itself. It was the calm, the stillness that arrived when I finally stopped being surprised. Have you ever noticed that the moment you stop needing someone's approval is the exact moment they realize how much they needed yours?